Welcome back to Who's to Know, and tonight for dinner we're going to be making homemade pizza. Homemade pizza is one of my favorite things to make, and I have found that there's just no frozen pizza, I've tried a lot, that can compare to a really good homemade pizza. So it might sound intimidating, but it's really easy. I use a dough mix. All you do to this is add hot water, and I will show you how to spice it up a little bit with some garlic salt to add into the dough to give it a little bit more flavor, and also some salt. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. To preheat the oven to 475, I like to do it at 500 degrees to make sure the crust really gets baked well. I've got my little bowl here that I'm gonna put the flour mix in. So I've got the flour mix here in the bowl, and then what I'm gonna do is just add a little bit of salt, probably a teaspoon, not much more than that, just to give the dough itself some flavor. I have found that if you just use this, it tastes okay, but it could taste a little better. And we'll also add some garlic salt, add a half cup of hot tap water. Stir with a fork until well blended. It starts to kind of get clumpy, and there will be times where you need to actually take what's on the fork here and scrape it off like that. Make sure that all the flour itself actually gets mixed in there. That I'll actually just get in here and use my fingers to mix it in the rest of the way so that we make sure everything gets in there. We're gonna try to form it into a dough ball as best we can. I think we may need just a tiny bit more water. Okay, so it's mostly mixed in pretty good. There's still some around the edges. And then what it's gonna tell you to do is put 1 teaspoon of oil over top of it to keep it from drying out, and then let it sit for about 5 minutes in a warm place to rise. So I just kind of drizzle some over there. I'm not really gonna measure it, but you can see it's kind of mostly wet on top, and that's kind of what we're looking for. So now we're gonna cover this I just cover it with any clean dish towel that I have around. And actually most of the time what I do is I put it on top of the oven right like this. I'll actually crack the door from the oven open to let that warm air get on there, and that'll help the dough to rise just a little bit. So we're gonna let that go for 5 minutes. The directions on here say to grease a 12-inch pizza pan or a large baking sheet. What I like to do is use cornmeal. I used to work at a pizza shop, and cornmeal is what we would use to line the pans, and it's really effective. So I'll show you kind of how I do that instead of doing the grease. This jar of cornmeal actually is this double purpose. It serves also as my rolling pin. So what we'll do is we'll actually just put some of the cornmeal right here in the middle. Once the ball of dough gets on here, then as we start to spread it out, we might put some more. Usually what I like to put on my pizza is pepperoni and black olives, but I don't have any of that tonight. So what I'm gonna do is just use bacon and just have a simple bacon and cheese pizza. The sauce I use is also just the store brand sauce. I'm not a big heavy sauce person. And for the cheese, I just get the store brand of the pizza blend, and that works really nicely. Okay, our dough is all ready to go. It only had about 3 minutes, but that was enough for it because the door to the oven was open and it was quite hot because it's at 500 degrees. So we will go ahead and take this dough and we'll put it right there just like that. And one thing when you're working with dough like this is to kind of have flour on your hands and also on anything else so that it doesn't stick, so the flour doesn't stick to you. So rubbing flour on this and a little bit on your hands is gonna help the dough from sticking to your hands, and it will roll out more easily. So like I mentioned, I'm just gonna roll this out simply with this weight, and this is exactly what a rolling pin would be doing. And we're just gonna try to get it in as much of a circular shape as we can. Sometimes it's lopsided, but that's the way it goes. Just kind of keep working this around. you want, you could use your hands to kind of work it out like that. That's actually maybe just as effective. You want to try to avoid spreading it too thinly in areas, because then it will, that's how bubbles get created, is the dough gets very thin and then bubbles spring up. You don't want a bubble in your pizza. So just kind of keep spreading this out till we're mostly satisfied with the way that it looks. Just kind of slowly keep stretching, stretching, stretching. Then what I'm going to do is check on the bottom of this to make sure that there's enough cornmeal on the bottom so that it doesn't stick to the pan when we put it in. And if it can slide around like this fairly easily, then that is also a good indicator that you've probably got enough cornmeal under there. So now we're just going to dish out our pizza sauce. If I can get this open. There we go. And like I said, I don't like a lot of sauce, so I'm going to be easy on the sauce. One other thing that you want to do to prevent getting bubbles in your pizza is to poke it with a fork like this so that air can get in and around there. So we'll just do this pretty much all over. All right. And now for the sauce. Like I said, I'm not a huge sauce person, so I'm not going to use too much, but maybe it'll be this whole thing. We'll see kind of how it goes. I usually like to start from the center and work the sauce out like this. This is how they show you to do it when you work in the pizza business. They, of course, have a nice ladle that's just the right size and puts the right amount of sauce in there every time. And they also have a lot of other tricks, but. So definitely want a little bit more than that, because one thing that the sauce does do is it keeps air bubbles also from popping up. So you want to make sure, if you have the sauce like that, there's an obvious spot where there isn't sauce, that's definitely where a bubble might pop up. So you want to make sure that you spread your sauce around very evenly. All right, and now we're ready for our cheese. With the cheese, one thing it's important to remember is if you put too much cheese on and it starts to melt, what is going to happen is it's actually going to slide off of the pizza onto the pan. Now, that's fine, but if you want a solid crust around the edge, then you'll want to make sure that maybe you don't put too much cheese on. Make sure you have a nice layer of cheese right close up to that kind of goes between the sauce and the edge of the crust. That's what's going to hold on the rest of the cheese. That's what anchors your cheese actually to the pizza and to the crust. Usually I like pepperoni and black olives, but I don't have that tonight. Tonight we're just going to have bacon. All right, now we're just putting our bacon on. I like to get these, instead of bits, it says bacon pieces. I found I like them because they're just much more substantial pieces, and it makes you actually feel like you're eating a piece of bacon and not just this very, very small bacon bit that might not even be real bacon, right? So I like these bacon pieces. The thing I like to do is just kind of pat everything down, just like that. It says bake on the lowest oven rack at 10 minutes or until the crust is golden brown and toppings are hot. So what I like to do is actually I like to do it for 5 minutes on the bottom rack to really get that underneath, to really get the crust of the pizza done. And then 5 minutes in, I switch it to the top rack. So that's what we're gonna do. And make sure to push it all the way back into the oven. And while we're waiting for that, we're gonna clean all this up. So we just transferred our pizza from the bottom to the top a little bit early. I was smelling a little bit of a smell, so I wanted to make sure that it wasn't burning. But actually, probably at 500 degrees, what you're going to smell burning is the cornmeal. So that's going to kind of, that will burn instead of the bottom of the pizza, which is actually a good thing. So it's kind of serving its purpose in two senses. It is keeping the pizza from getting stuck to the pan, but it's also in immediate contact with the pan, and so it will burn before the crust of the pizza burns, which is what we want. So I just put it on the top rack and then I set the timer for another 5 minutes. And you'll also want to watch to make sure that it doesn't cook too long on the top, because the cheese will start to burn in maybe a way that you don't want, but it will get a little brown. We've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to peep in the oven and see what the top looks like. Let's see. I'd say about 1 more minute, or maybe we'll let it go the full time. We'll see what happens. Okay, so the timer's gone off. We're going to pull out our pizza. It's very hot, so be careful. All right, so what I'm going to do is just test kind of underneath test the crust here on the bottom to see if it got done. We'll go ahead and slide it off the pan so that it doesn't continue to brown or anything. And you can kind of see here some of this, yeah, some of this cornmeal will get burned and it'll look like that. That's fine. That's good. Whew, pan's hot even through the... What I'm feeling for is to see that the center part of the crust underneath is actually crisp enough. And it feels like it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit for just a minute, and that'll allow the cheese that's gotten all melty to kind of set up just a little bit, and then so that when you go to cut it, it doesn't just ooze everywhere. Okay, so if we have let our cheese set up just a little bit, and so we're going to go ahead and slice this. Even though I have a pizza slicer, I still really like to use my knife because I really want to hear that crunch on the crust when I cut through it. And you can see it did get crispy enough because that does kind of cut through that crust and it makes a crunchy noise. That's what we want to hear. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm pretty satisfied with that. You can see that it's steaming off there. The crust is nice and thick right here, and you can see that it actually supports itself. So a lot of times what happens when you make homemade pizza is this inner part of the crust right here, the very part in the middle, doesn't get done enough, and then you have a floppy piece of pizza, and I don't like that. So I like to make sure that that crust gets done, and one of the ways I do that is by turning the oven up to 500 and doing it on the bottom and on the top rack. So that is our pizza. Usually I would eat this either just by itself or maybe with a salad or with some steamed peas, but I think tonight we're just gonna have the pizza. That's how to make homemade pizza, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.